Hey everyone, welcome to the latest installment of MSP Business School. As always, I'm Brian Doyle here with you. And I've got a person I've just gotten to know a little bit over the last few months, and I'm excited that he's able to join me today. One of those funny things, right? You meet people out in the industry far and wide, and sometimes they live right down the street and you don't even know it. And that's the case for me and this guest, who we actually share the same hometown, and a mutual friend put us together, and I really like what he's been up to, and I think he's going to be able to share a lot with you folks as well. So, Sean, I'd like to welcome you. And folks, this is Sean Sweeney from Valley Technology Partners. How are you today, Sean?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on the show.
You bet. You bet. I'm really excited to chat a little bit more because as much as we've gotten to know each other, I really don't know as much about your background as I think we do. So one of the things we like to start out with is, tell folks a little bit about how you ended up in the world of technology and more specifically, how you found yourself in the crazy world of MSP.
Sure. So my route to get here is a little bit different. I actually went to school to be an attorney, and I went to UConn for undergrad. Did law school. I got about a semester into it, and I was like, "This is not for me." So I ended up going back after UConn to Manchester Community College, and I got just a certificate in network management. And from there, I went on to start working in IT, and I bounced around a little bit between companies. Got some good experience, and I ended up in an MSP for a few years. So I worked at one that's local to us here in the Connecticut space for a couple of years, learned a ton, and I was able to parlay that into some roles in sales engineering in big tech. So I've spent the last 12 years working at VMware and then at Google and then at Microsoft as a pre-sales engineer. So working with enterprise companies on the technology, a lot of the same stuff that we use in the SMB space and the MSP space, but got to get up close and personal with how these products are made, how the product management teams prioritize things, and how the enterprise works, right? Getting close to those customers and finding the right needs for them. So I find myself back here in the MSP space after those 12 years. After having a sit down conversation with my wife about wanting to do something that I felt a little bit more connected to. And she was like, "Well, what was your favorite job?" And my two favorite jobs were waiting tables. So that wasn't going to happen again. And the other one was being an engineer at an MSP. And so, I had some side work customers that I'd worked with for many years. And, one of them convinced me to give this a go. And here we are.
Well, first I'm going to take that piece of waiting tables and go, as somebody that did that as well. There are some parallels between waiting tables and being an MSP. And if, especially when it comes to customer server and customer success aspects of it, probably a whole other episode that we could do, no doubt. But let's not gloss over your 12 years that you were in, these larger enterprises. Our MSP community is working with the companies that you were a part of on the daily. And they can find it to be challenging, because they are so large and sometimes a little bit fractured as well between the different groups. Maybe talk a little bit more, while you were supporting enterprise accounts, what was that relationship like? And, maybe even delve into a little bit, was it easy or challenging for you to navigate the belly of these big beasts, even as a direct employee?
So the answer to that last piece is really, it depends upon the company, right? So at the smaller side, we had VMware, and VMware was such an amazing company to work for. I loved it. I've still got friends who were there post Broadcom acquisition. VMware was fairly easy to find what you needed, right? Then you step up to like the next size of bureaucracy, and Google was, it worked. You found what you needed. Microsoft was very process oriented, where there was a deeper amount of bureaucracy. And so, as you increase your tenure at Microsoft, your ability to understand where to find things, how to find things, and who to go to becomes extremely important. But I think that a lot of that really does translate into helping customers at the local scale, right? With the types of customers that I'm picking up as an MSP now, because you understand what the motivation is for the people who work there, right? What types of KPIs are they held to? How are they paid, right? So how does their compensation drive their behavior? And, working in those roles, interestingly, being a pre-sales engineer, I think, is very similar to a lot of the VCIO work that you would do with your companies, where it's very focused on how am I providing meaningful advice to the executives that I'm supporting at these companies. Now, it's a little bit different because in those scenarios, I was still beholden to the company that I worked for. And I was focused first and foremost on moving the products that we sold, right? And making sure that everybody on those executive teams understood what the benefit was for them. So there's a big focus on ROI, understanding how their teams are using things, really knowing their business getting as close as you can to as well as they do, so that you can make sure that you're making intelligent recommendations while also building up your sales funnel, right? And so that's kind of how I'm approaching my MSP customers. Is I want to come in, I want to understand, what do they do, how do they make their money, what are the biggest problems that they're running into with doing that? How is technology a blocker? And then trying to find ways to sort of grease the skids to get them where they need to be. Now, obviously, not every conversation is going to be as easy as trying to help them, do cool new stuff, because there's going to be stuff around compliance and security that gets seen as a cost center. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of overlap between those roles, because your goal is to make sure that the leaders of those businesses feel comfortable with their technology decisions. They understand that you're helping to make them safe, and that you have their best interests in mind when you're making these recommendations.
And I think a big part of what you did there, talked about there, though, is also getting to know the people individually, right? And we do talk about that on the VCIO side, that you really need to understand the person sitting across from you, what their drivers are and what their motivations are. But even things like understanding how they get paid can be an amazing difference, too, because some of them are compensated on savings. Mm-hmm. Some of them are compensated on getting the best price, especially in the world that you were living in. And sometimes that price can't be attained, right? So how do you find that middle road in those negotiations? The other thing is you're playing the role of advocate. You're going to, obviously, at wearing any one of the labels that you wore, you have to come at it very hard and try to sell for your company, because at the end of the day, that's what your job is. As an MSP, sometimes you can be a little bit more flexible, where you can, say, look, if this product's not for you, let me go find another product. But you don't have that luxury when you're serving a master, if you will. So, but what I really like that you talked about in there, and this is something that's been going around on a lot of the message boards of late too, is just that concept of, hey, understand the motivation, work with them, be an advocate, show them what they need to do, but ultimately you're not making the decision, they are. And if you don't do a good job of helping them understand the why, you're probably not going to get the deal.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, a big part of that is really breaking down these technical concepts, reading something like a post-incident report, right? And trying to put that into human terms for them, so that you can sit down with that person who owns the business or runs the business and explain to them, how did this happen? How can we prevent this from happening again? Why are these remediation steps, even though some of them might be minor annoyances, like, enabling two-factor authentication or whatever it is that you're doing there, how is that ultimately going to help you in the long run? Why is it worth that sacrifice, right? So being able to have that conversation and meet them where they are in terms of understanding is a big part of it too. And that applies, whether you're working in the enterprise and you're talking to people who have very senior IT jobs, or if you're talking to a business owner locally.
Yeah, risk mitigation is always a huge conversation. And honestly, risk in the SMB market is probably a bigger challenge than it is in the enterprise, right? You have an outage, you're one of the healthcare companies that, exist in our region, right? Fortune, some cases 10 companies that we work with, right? They can weather the storm of a breach or some sort of outage that hits a smaller sector of their customers, and just buy their way out of that problem, right? Buy their way out through credit monitoring, buy their way out through restitution, and buy their way out through fines. For a small company, a single act of a single incident could take the whole company out of business permanently and leave the owner in a very difficult position long term. So really, I like the approach where you're talking more about risk mitigation as opposed to feature enhancement or feature and facts, speeds and feeds kind of conversations.
Yeah, in my experience, right, when you're working with those big companies, and you hit a lot of it right on the head, but things like the ability to sustain the brand impact from a breach and having their data leaked, right? If you carry one of those big names, a household name, it's much easier to do that than it is for a smaller company that relies very heavily on their relationships and trust with people who they do business with, right? So I think that is that's obviously a huge part of it. And the other thing is that, they have a bigger budget for software. So when you're saying, hey, you've got to go up to this higher version of Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace or whatever product it is that you're using, or you've got to layer something else on top of it, they can withstand that much easier. And they also have chief compliance officers, chief information security officers, and those people can much more easily push a change through an organization than you can at a smaller business where, they're used to having a more collaborative relationship with the people that they work for than you might have at, one of the companies that we've got in Hartford today.
But, I think that's a great example of where you got to learn who your internal allies are, whether it's big or small. It's a little more obvious when it's big, right? We know that when we've got a risk concern and we've got breach potential, getting the compliance officer into the mix will usually you know, push that needle a little bit more. And they usually have the ear of the CEO or CFO as well, right? When you're dealing with a smaller company, though, you got to look at who those internal allies are within that organization as well. They might not be as easy to spot because they're wearing many hats, but there's somebody that's ultimately responsible for that. And I think it's one of the areas where, as a community, we could do better at digging and really going, who else is part of this decision? Who else is an influencer of this decision? I worked for a CEO that used to say you need to know 3 people up, 3 people down, and 3 people at each side, right? Did the sign of the cross at you there. But, the small businesses might not have that many people, but they do have more than one person unilaterally making a decision. And we've got to surface that, because that's where you need to sometimes have your back channel conversations to help get these things done.
Absolutely. And it's interesting too, even just from a sales techniques perspective, you can lead with a lot of, I would say, anxiety inducing questions when you're selling into the enterprise, because they get them from all their vendors. They're used to them, right? And honestly, it's a way to drive some of those things forward. But when you're working with somebody who owns a small business, I don't necessarily want to go in and lead with fear as a way to sell, right? So it's finding a way to make that connection with them on a more human level around why this is important.
And most of the time, fear won't be received necessarily either, because there's this, popular concept at the SMB level. It's not going to happen to me. But certainly one of the things that we need to be educating, and our community does a good job of this, is, hey, you're just a number. Bots are going out looking for pathways to enter, and they're scanning for open ports. And if they find one, they're going to drop something in. And if they can make $1 or they can make 100,000, it could be worth their time. It's no longer discriminatory. It's no longer going after big targets. Now it's just, let's cast a wide net and see what comes in.
100%. And I mean, even in the short time that I've been back doing this, right, I've seen a couple of those incidents where, somebody's able to get into that environment. Sometimes it's through a phishing attempt. Sometimes it's through a misconfiguration. But yeah, I mean, it's easy to have the "this won't happen to me" attitude. But at the same time, it absolutely can, right? So it's trying to make that messaging clear.
Yeah, and I think that's where the transition in styles have been coming. I know more and more of the MSPs are coming from that risk-focused conversation. Hey, Mr. Customer, it's not that it can't happen to you. It's more of a when's it going to happen, and where are the pathways that are of least resistance into your environment. Usually it's at the human level, right? So let's get some security and awareness training going. Let's make sure somebody's actually governing over that process. And we can be there to help you with that governance process if you don't have the capacity to do so.
Exactly. And that's the big part of it too, as an MSP, is I can be your partner who's going to come in and take care of this for you, right? You want to remove this from something that's on your plate of things to worry about. That's where we come in. I think that there's a huge value add there too.
Perfect. So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing today. You've been out there, with Valley Technology Partners for a while now. And, what are you seeing in the marketplace that surprises you as somebody coming from the enterprise, that you maybe didn't anticipate for it out of the SMB market space coming in over here? Because there's a lot of people like you in our community.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that I had my eyes pretty well opened coming into it, because I did have those side work customers that I've been working with for the past, 15 years or so. And so in those scenarios, I knew what some of the challenges were around getting certain compliance things turned on in the environment, right? Or what budgets look like versus what I'm used to. But I think that I came in with my eyes pretty open, and I haven't seen anything that's terribly shocking from that end. I think that what the biggest difference for me is sometimes the sense of urgency differences that you'll get versus working with one of these large companies where things have to go through multiple layers of review, right? There have been times where I put a statement of work out, and like the same day I got like an "all right, let's go ahead." And that's refreshing for me, because obviously that means that I can move ahead to that phase where I can actually deliver this project for the customer. But it also goes the other way sometimes too, where there can be these very long lulls between high periods of activity, right? So I'll be here, I'm doing administrative work, checking on client environments, getting invoices out, et cetera, but I'm not doing a lot of technical work. And then a lot of those SOWs will hit at once. And then it's kind of like you're almost in terror of like, how am I going to get everything done in this short period of time? I think for the people who are listening too, I'm a little bit different than a lot of the other people that may be involved in the space, where I'm currently working on my own. So until I get to a level where I've got enough revenue that it makes sense to bring in somebody to start taking, those initial calls as they come in, right now it's just me. So I think that, my ups and downs and my workflows are probably a bit different than what some of the other listeners run into.
Yeah, there's a lot of solopreneurs in our community that are going after it themselves and, leaning on shared resources that we can buy to support some of the gaps as they look to scale. So I don't think your story is not unique, but it definitely can be a little bit more difficult when things come in at one time to be able to, attend to it all. But I think at every step of scale, that problem exists, right? All of a sudden, when a customer signs on the dotted line, no matter when it is, now they're like, okay, I just told you I'm ready. Let's do. And the expectation is now. And sometimes, I've had the fortunate of being able to have some flexibility with some of my customers. I can go, so what you're saying is I waited 6 months. You gave it to me today and you want me to start tomorrow. Well, that's not going to happen. I go, I've got to line up my resources, get things ready. This might be a couple weeks out before we can kick this off because I've got to get the right people in play because I was ready for you 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly.
But that takes some time and trust too before you can start having those fun conversations. But
for somebody like me, you've got to make sure the partners that you work with on some of these things are also available at that time.
Yep.
Not just me. So for sure.
Yeah, it's always a juggling act. And I think even some of the biggest MSPs will tell you part of the challenge out there is the talent glut. It's not easy to find all the resources that you're looking for, when you start looking at the more senior levels. And, and that can be challenging on a project as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I'm doing is, trying to, and this kind of is similar to the company that I worked for as an MSP in the past, but I'm trying to get days where it's like, okay, in a co-managed IT situation, I can come in and I can be a part of your team, right? And so generally we'll schedule 1 day a week plus a few extra hours that I might be available for things that pop up. But that's been working out pretty well for me too, because then it gives you, a little bit more of a predictable revenue stream, especially early on. And I think that co-managed IT for those mid-sized businesses is also, for me, kind of a sweet spot because they're interested in what was being done at that enterprise level for all those years that I was doing it, and trying to get them to the same point across their cloud environments, right? Making sure that everything is hardened properly, from a security and compliance perspective, even from a cloud billing perspective, right? Do we have RIs locked in properly? Do we need software that maybe is doing some of this for us and monitoring these things? And so going in there and providing that work is also something that I enjoy doing quite a bit, and that's been a nice starting piece for me.
That's awesome. I think it's always been that way. Start with what you know and start with what you like, and then see how you can expand and grow from there. Mm-hmm. So, with that being said, let's talk a little bit about what you see as part of your future and what you're seeing as trends out in the market space as well. Obviously, one of the biggest buzzwords out there is AI. Everybody's saying it. Everybody's talking about it. Have you been engaging with any of your customers on those types of projects yet? Or are you finding your customers are still at that, I'm not sure what I want to do stage?
Yeah, pretty heavily. And so the approach that I take is, sometimes AI sounds like it's one of those buzzy things that is a solution in search of a problem. But unlike things like, remember when everybody was talking about blockchain a few years ago and people were trying to integrate it into their workflows, which, didn't even make sense for a lot of stuff. AI is definitely going to be here to stay because it provides real economic value. But I think that what companies need to be aware of is that as you're going out and you're talking about AI, it has to start with that use case, right? And I know you and I had a conversation about this, but what are the things that are administrative burden that you would like to see automated, right? Give me those problems, let me look at those, and I can help to prioritize for you what makes sense as an AI workload. And so some of this stuff could be as easy as for a nonprofit, they want to get their AI generated meeting notes and they want them automatically sent out to the group for quorum, and then using that to help to start generate an agenda for the next meeting, right? That's something that we've gone through and we've done with a little bit of custom scripting on the Google side, and that's very easy to do. Then, on the other side, I've worked with auto shops where they've got thousands upon thousands of documents that exist, right? And that's where they get things like, what is my test plan if I'm trying to solve this particular problem on this particular model of car? And, a lot of these shops are generalists, so they're going to have maybe tens of thousands of them across the cars that they commonly work on. And so what we did was we actually set up kind of a very simple RAG process for them to start saving some time for their techs when they're answering questions. So basically, it's a process that scrapes Google Drive, It creates an embeddings database based upon all the information that's in Google Drive. And then you've got a simple web UI that's behind a password protected portal that people can log into and they can ask questions. Hey, I'm working on a 2007 Porsche 911 with this fault. What do I do? So they populate that question into the chatbot, and then it uses that combination of Claude, the Google Docs, and the embeddings database to spit out to them, this is the answer. And oh, by the way, these are the PDF files that I used as sources if you want to go and verify that, right? So I find that there is maybe a little bit of pushback initially to AI because people see it as either that hype thing that we were talking about or something that people are using to lay off employees and that doesn't match their values. But when you start to get down to using AI as augmentative technology versus replacing technology, and finding ways to save time so that people can go where the value is in their role, the value of a mechanic is going to be getting cars 100% and getting them back out on the road. It's not figuring out how to parse a shared drive filled with PDF files to find the right one. So the goal is to get people to where they are creating value and where they are making money and not focusing on some of these things that are, more mundane. That's how I've been starting with it. And obviously there's a ton more that you can do with it. But I found so far that message has been pretty receptive. The one thing that is a little bit of a wrench in the works when it comes to that is just making sure that you understand the compliance footprint for people in that space, right? So if you're working with medical practices, they have a BAA with the person or the company that they are setting up this AI platform with. Do they understand what can and can't go into it? CMMC is a big deal right now, right? CMMC 2.0. Can you put anything into an AI platform? Because there are people out there who are saying basically no across the board, versus understanding what that actually looks like and how these things have to be secured. So I think that, going out there and being able to show not only this is what it can do for you, but here's how we can do it in a way that's compliant with all of the regulations that you're being held to. That's a big value add for customers.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing that you alluded to at the end there. Also understand the landscape of the customer. Like, I'm sure setting something up in an auto shop with kind of publicly found records, and documents is a pretty innocuous process. They're not held to really any security standards, nor is there any personally identifiable information in that chain of custody. But certainly when you start looking at other ways you can build a similar, kind of use case, but in different verticals, that compliance piece becomes real. That becomes a real scary thing. What tools you're using become real. What your connections and pathways are to the larger language models becomes a big issue there. And I think that's an oft overlooked concept as we, by many, as we enter into the, what I'd still call the infancy stages of customer AI.
And I think that that's a big piece too, when it comes to what do you have in your environment and what do you want to do with this, is understanding, do you have people who are using it today and are they doing it on the free version of ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or something like that, right? My mindset as it relates to that is, there are people that you'll see on Reddit, right, in the MSP subreddit, who are talking about blocking AI across the board inside of the organization. And I think that's the wrong approach, because people are going to want to use it to make themselves more effective.
Same thing people said with social early on, and then they realized it was a huge marketing vehicle for the right people,
right,
in the organization.
So it's making sure that you have something that you have approved and has the correct guardrails around it and correct logging to make sure that it's done properly. That way, they do have an option to go use it in a secure manner, versus when you're trying to block it all, any use is automatically going to be insecure, right? So just making sure that people understand what the benefits are of doing that and how that can actually be a compliance upside versus an additional risk.
Well, Sean, we're getting near the end of our time now. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up today that you'd like to share.
Nothing in particular. I don't have like really strong words of wisdom yet, being 5 minutes into the journey for anybody else who's interesting, but I really do appreciate you having me on. I appreciate the conversation. Obviously the rest of the conversations that we've had, one-on-one, as you've kind of helped to mentor me through this. So I appreciate it. I
think one of the biggest things I wanted to share in having you on, Sean, was that take your past experiences, even if you're something new, and there's a great way it translates, right? So, for those that are starting up and listening and trying to figure out the world of sales, the world of MSP, the world of, AI, start small, draw from your past experience, and then take those and right size it for the market that you're going to, and everything will be A-okay. All right. So listeners, as always, you can get these podcasts on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button so you can see them again, or you can download them anywhere that you get your podcasts today. Sean, I want to really thank you for joining me today. We look forward to seeing you again. Listeners, for you, Sean's link to his LinkedIn will be in our show notes as well. So reach out, say hello, and we'll see you again next week.
Right.